Hello everyone and welcome back to the Star Wars Library, where Star Wars is in print. And today we're going to be talking, I guess, another kind of a supplement thing. I was trying to figure out when I wanted to do this, and I kind of figured since in our chronology, we're getting very close to kind of the dark times and kind of the entrance of this era, I decided to kind of talk about this kind of all together as kind of, again, a large supplemental episode. And that's the Star Wars role-playing games. Now, the Star Wars role-playing games, it's kind of a long history. It kind of starts here in the 1980s. And so it's kind of, I want to kind of talk about all three companies that have had the rights and kind of look at it kind of all in one big video for you today. So basically around this time, now I'm kind of fast forwarding a little bit, but around this time, we're wrapping up kind of the, like I said in the last episode about, or supplement about the Titan collection of Insider, we're kind of moving to an end of an era for Star Wars. We're coming out of the 80s, so the original trilogy era is done. Ewoks is on its second season, about to be done. Droids only has one season. We've had a couple of Droids and Ewoks comic books. We're finishing up the Marvel series, and then we're going to be finishing up the Ewoks and Droids, and then of course we're going to lastly be talking about Star Wars 3D. And then that's kind of it. There really is no more new Star Wars content coming out at this time. There's no more movies, there's no more things. I mean, there's nothing. George Lucas has kind of moved on at this point in time. He's making he did the Indiana Jones stuff. He's working on Willow, Howard the Duck, and then he's doing the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles. So Star Wars is kind of dead, but there is one company that is keeping Star Wars going, keeping the embers burning ever so slightly. And that is, of course, West End Games. West End Games is a company that is no longer around. This company is no longer in business, and we'll get to why they are no longer in business a little bit later in this video. But they were the ones who came around and started creating the Star Wars role-playing game. Now, a role-playing game, for those of you that don't know, is basically a tabletop kind of game where there's a game master who crafts an adventure, crafts a story, and has people create their own characters, and they go on this journey and go through this campaign or story that the game masters come up with. It's almost anything can happen. It's very imaginative. My friends and I have done it a couple times. We've done the Pathfinder role-playing game, so we haven't done any Star Wars yet. I'd like to, but since I'm probably going to be the one who ends up being the game master, I really want to kind of get my understanding of a role-playing game and playing it and kind of seeing the player perspective and then going over to the game master perspective, because our GM is a guy who knows a little bit more than us. But anyways, so West End Games started putting out their stuff. Now, this is the Game Master Handbook. They would come out with several editions of this. They'd come out with a first edition, a second edition, and then a third edition, which only lasted a very short amount of time because that was right before the Star Wars prequels were coming out, and that happened to be when they lost the license. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Now, West End Games did this kind of thing where they would only use a six-sided die. Basically, rolling the die would dictate your actions. And it was a die that was just a simple six-sided die. A very simple die that you could find in pretty much any board game that you probably had lying around your house. From the basics like Monopoly or, just any kind of board game that you would have around your house, you could find a dice. Or you could get one, of course, at a local game and hobby store. But they would put out multiple different kinds of source books and different campaigns and different things that you could do. Different eras. Of course, they had the kind of the dark times. They had the original trilogy era, and then they had pretty much all the stuff that was coming out post Return of the Jedi. So there were a lot of different things. For example, one of my favorites is the Darkstrider campaign, and this source book, Endgame, is actually from that campaign. There's the Darkstrider campaign here. So they did a couple other things, like their original content, which was actually pretty cool. They also did things for different parts of Star Wars, like I said, that was coming out at the time. For example, books like the Thrawn trilogy. This is the Dark Force Rising source book. They had the movies, so here's the movie trilogy source book and things like that. Of course, they would also put out a special edition of this. A couple of my favorites here, even the comic books got one. For example, here's Tales of the Jedi, that companion, which is great. This is a great companion, by the way, for Tales of the Jedi fans. And, of course, Dark Empire got one as well. There were tons of others like Shadows of the Empire, the Rebel Alliance got one, the Imperials got one. I don't have all of the Star Wars West End game stuff in print. If I don't have them physically, I have them digitally. Of course, this stuff is all available at StarWarsTimeline.net. So if you're wanting to go through them, you are definitely able to. Now, using, say, for example, Dark Empire as our example here, what is the point, or what you as a Expanded Universe fan would get from this? Well, there are actually a lot of cool character stats, character summaries. For example, there's some cool things where, you know, it kind of gives you some behind the scenes. For example, here is you know, like a treaty of the New Republic, and it's all like written in the lore, which is really cool. There's even, by the way, some short fiction in here as well. For example, one of the things that I really like about the movie trilogy source book is that it's actually written from the perspective of someone who's kind of doing their homework on the Galactic Civil War and kind of going through the history of that. So it's kind of, you know, it's like, oh, I'm beginning my history of of the Galactic Civil War, and it's right before the Thrawn and Dark Empire campaign, and so that's really cool. And so again, just the creativity of West End Games is just incredible. West End Games is probably the best role-playing games that I've seen of Star Wars, at least, just simply because it is just so imaginative. Their ideas were so incredible. My buddy Matt Wilkins has done some videos where he's dived into kind of how West End Games would do things and construct and create their campaigns, their games. In fact, George Lucas was actually a huge fan of the West End Games material, that he included a lot of that stuff in the prequels. And in fact, a lot of times authors would say when they get contracted to write a book, they'd get a whole stack of these kinds of things sent to them, and it was the complete West End Games collection. And so, for example, you know, Kevin J. Anderson say he's going to go write the Jedi Academy. Well, he's going to get the, you know, all the stuff, including the Thrawn trilogy, because that came before. And then, of course, he's going to get his, Dark Empire and tons of other things. So, you know, in fact, he made Dave Filoni make the Gundarks in the Clone Wars show look like the ones that were in West End Games. George was a huge fan of this. So, what happened? Well, even though they were so creative, and there's actually one more thing I actually wanted to talk about before we kind of conclude West End Games' era. Now, one of the cool things that they did do was kind of put out a supplemental magazine, kind of, and it's this, the Star Wars Adventure Journal. This is volume 1 of a 15-volume set. There are some unpublished ones that, of course, you can get on StarWarsTimeline.net. A lot of those stories, too, were reprinted in, like, the Tales from the Empire, Tales from the New Republic. This is a beautiful idea that West End Games would do. It would come out with, they had a couple of things in here that would talk about upcoming Star Wars things, like here's the first Rebel Assault game they're kind of talking about, they're kind of hyping up. They're talking about the Super Star Wars games. They're advertising Tales of the Jedi is coming out, and the Courtship of Princess Leia, and just all the different kinds of things. But then there would be short stories in here by a lot of Star Wars mainstays. Like here is one by Timothy Zahn, and for example, he wrote Thrawn's first chronological appearance in the EU in the Adventure Journal. And then after that, they would have stats of the characters, so you could use them in your campaigns. And you could potentially even pick up where they left off. Again, really cool adventure ideas. And so there's a lot, the main reason to get these, if you're a Star Wars EU fan, is to read the short stories. Now, Are these worth it? I don't think so. I don't really know how much they go for right now online. When I got these, I got them in a lot, so I was able to get a pretty decent deal on them and get them all. And so that for me has been great. But I don't know how much they're going for right now. If you do get them, you might have to buy them in lots, but again, I don't know. But again, these can all be digitally on Joe Bongiorno's site, StarWarsTimeline.net. So if you want these and they're out of your price or you can't find them secondhand, you can get them digitally. I've had to do that for a couple of the West End Games stuff. It's no big deal. So what happened with West End Games? Well, tragedy struck. The owner of West End Games also had a shoe company, and the shoe company was failing. It was failing miserably. And so he was siphoning money from West End Games and pumping it into this failing shoe company. And then, of course, both companies had to file for bankruptcy, and Lucasfilm is not going to work with a bankrupt company, so they ripped the rights from him right before the prequel trilogy started coming out, right before Episode 1. So woulda, shoulda, coulda, right? I mean, who knows what they would have done. Personally, I've thought about this several times. What would West End Games do with the prequels? What would they do? They'd probably come up with these incredible ideas, because I love what they came up with for the OT era. I think it's fantastic. But c'est la vie, and another company took over. So after West End Games came Wizards of the Coast. Wizards of the Coast is a company that is fairly known, or at least at the time they had their they were in charge of the Pokemon card games. So me as a kid who was collecting all this stuff had no idea that not only did Wizards of the Coast have Pokemon, but they had Star Wars, which as a kid that would have blown my mind. I came into Wizards of the Coast very late. I wasn't paying attention to all this growing up, to the role-playing games. So they eventually put out their core rulebook and their game right after Phantom Menace came out. And so this one kind of deals pretty much with Episode 1, and then, of course, the OT. They put out a revised edition that includes Attack of the Clones, and then much, much later, they would put out the Saga edition, which would come out much later. So Wizards of the Coast is probably my least favorite of the Star Wars RPG license holders, for several reasons, and I'll tell you why. The number one reason I think that for me, and then I think for other people, why Wizards of the Coast maybe isn't remembered as fondly as, say, West End Games, is because they had what was called a D20 system. Now, the D20 system was a 20-sided die, a huge jump from just the plain Jane 6-sided die that West End Games had. Here's the problem, though. A D20 would be fine, but it wasn't just a D20. They had tons and tons of different kinds of die. There'd be a 15-sided die, or a 13, or an 8, or a 10, or a 16, or for an 18, or or a 3. There were just too many dice. There were so many dice, and if you didn't have all that dice, it made it very hard to play. So you'd have to go out and you'd have to hunt out all this dice. For West End Games, if you didn't have a dice that you necessarily bought with the game, you could rip one out of frickin', Monopoly or something. You could rip one out of pretty much any board game. This one made it immediately harder to play. Another thing was that these books were a lot more expensive because they were all in hardback. Now, yes, West End Games did have some in hardback, but a lot of them too were in paperback. So they were all in hardback, which especially, here's the thing too, now these books are very hard to find because they are out of print. When you do find them, because they're hardback, they can cost you a pretty penny. Again, I have found mine, found a couple on eBay. My local half-price books will sometimes have these, and you can get them for like $20. $20 a copy. So that's kind of how I've acquired some of these. Again, unfortunately I don't have all of these just because they are hard to find. Now, Wizards did not have terrible ideas. For example, one of my favorite source books, the Power of the Jedi source book, is actually a pretty good information guide to a lot of the Jedi lore. In fact, I've used this for several of my character analyses on the expanduniverse.com. One of my favorites in here, I think it's in this one, is they actually have a layout of the Valley of the Jedi from Dark Forces. which I love Kyle Katarn and I love Dark Forces, the Dark Forces series. So this is actually really cool. Their Rebel Alliance source book is actually pretty good. I enjoyed looking through this. My favorite one is actually the New Jedi Order. This one is fantastic. Unfortunately, it doesn't have all of NJO in it. It kind of stops at like Star by Star, I believe, or at I think just past Balance Point. But it's still great information about the Vong War and stuff. Now, Wizards would kind of, you would think that with Revenge of the Sith, Wizards would jump in and kind of do more stuff, but they actually kind of went quiet for a while. They kind of focused on their Star Wars miniatures. They focused on a lot of other things other than the Star Wars role-playing game. Eventually, though, they would finally come back and do some more. And they actually, this is when the Saga edition came out in 2007, and they kind of changed it. So they put out these littler versions of the books in comparison to the originals. It's a lot shorter. So these are, like, this one is the Scum and Villainy. Let's see, the Galaxy at War, Galaxy of Intrigue. I think this one is actually kind of sought after a little bit more than some others. The Unknown Regions. And then last but not least, the Force Unleashed even got one too, which is kind of nice. But, I mean, other than that, their ideas weren't terrible. But there weren't so much short fiction. There wasn't, you know, tons and tons of this kind of stuff in comparison to West End Games. They did have something similar, though, to West End Games. Now, they actually put out something like a Star Wars adventure journal. They put out a magazine called Star Wars Gamer. And so it only ran for like 10 issues. There was also a preview issue here that came out as well. It pretty much was all things gaming. For example, like here's talking about the Star Wars RPG on the back. There is... if we flip through here, there's ads about, like the Star Wars trading card game by Wizards of the Coast. They're now adding Attack of the Clones to it. They are doing a whole bunch of different things. They have, here's all about the new trading cards. Here's, in fact, talking about, I love it, the Hasbro games. So like Star Wars Stratego, Jedi Unleashed is a really good one. Epic Duels. Forgot about Epic Duels, one of my favorite Star Wars games. So they'd also have some short fiction in here as well that authors would do. But in comparison to Adventure Journal, again, Gamer just can't touch it. Nothing beats Adventure Journal by West End Games. It's just nothing. For me, nothing beats West End Games. But eventually, Wizards would lose the license as well, and they move on to other things, and then we are now getting more so into the current era of the Star Wars tabletop gaming. But now, of course, the license has switched again, and now we are at the current holder of the Star Wars tabletop license and the current producer of Star Wars role-playing games, and that is Fantasy Flight Games. They have made a lot of Star Wars games, some that aren't being supported anymore, some that they've finished and they've kind of put the bow on. Ones that I really like to play is, of course, Star Wars Armada, one that I enjoy playing quite a bit. Probably my favorite of all the Star Wars games that Fantasy Flight has put out is Imperial Assault. I love Imperial Assault so very much. So they've done that, which is kind of a miniatures game mixed with a role-playing game. Another one of my favorites, probably my second favorite that they've done, is Star Wars The Living Card Game. This has a lot of EU stuff in it, which is also fantastic. One of, probably after Imperial Assault, probably my favorite thing that they have put out. One that I liked, I haven't played it in a while. Maybe I'll get back into it one day. I don't know. I used to be into it. Now not so much really anymore. But Star Wars Destiny. This is a dice binder. It all came in like booster packs where you'd have to collect it, like Pokemon cards back in the day, the decks and this Darth Vader thing here. So, Destiny. But of course, they are also putting out X-Wing. They're putting out Star Wars Legion, which I'd love to get into. I just don't know if I want to invest the time and money into that. X-Wing I've played. It's kind of meh on that one. They've put out Rebellion, which I'd like to try. Currently, it's not Star Wars, but they're currently putting out all the Twilight Imperium stuff, and they're also doing the Marvel Champions, the card game, which I really, really like. Also want to try X-Men. But anyways, Fantasy Flight, getting back to Star Wars, also has done the role-playing games, and they have 3 of them. And basically, they took it and they broke it up into 3 different distinct groups or areas. So the first one they did, and this is a beta, was the Edge of the Empire. This one is basically, of course you can get the new version of these, and of course you can get source books and stuff. But so Edge of the Empire was the first one that they did, and this one is basically you're kind of a smuggler, bounty hunter, kind of in the dark times, and kind of dealing with the whole, empire taking over, and you're kind of the pirates and buccaneers kind of thing, kind of like a treasure hunting bounty hunter kind of thing. So then there's second, and these are all compatible with each other, so you don't have to do one or the other. They're all compatible. The second one they did was, of course, the Age of Rebellion, which not so much anymore, but I haven't really been buying Fantasy Flight, but Star Wars product, but we'll get to that in a bit of why. But Fantasy Flight, especially when they first got a hold of the Star Wars license, let's just say they beat the OT. They beat it till it was dead. They overdid the original trilogy, I think, very much so. But this was one of the first things that came out with it. So, of course, this is during the OT. This is during the original trilogy, Age of Rebellion. And then last but not least, and this is the last real thing I bought with it, or for the role-playing game, which is the Force and Destiny version, which adds Force users to it. This also has the beautiful retcon of the Dave Filoni Clone Wars to kind of help it better fit in the Legends, and kind of fix a lot of the continuity things. Here's the thing too with Fantasy Flight. They also have really good ideas. They've had a lot of good ideas, and they had great creativity and stuff. Again, here's my only issue with it. The dice. You have to have your own custom dice. For example, if you see right here, you would have to go to a store or buy it on their website or on Amazon or something, and you'd have to buy the Star Wars dice for this game. You can also buy the Star Wars dice app, which I've considered doing for Imperial Assault, and I think they have it for Armada too, but a lot of it is the main reason you get it is for the role-playing games, and X-Wing is another big one I've heard people get for it. So that's, FFG loves their own dice. Again, Star Wars Destiny is built around dice. So FFG loves their dice. With this, it's kind of a cool thing, kind of breaking it up into 3 unique things, and then you have all the source books that go with Edge of the Empire, Age of Rebellion, and Force and Destiny. You can, of course, mix them so like your character that you created in Edge of the Empire could then go into the other 2. I just feel like it's kind of limited on what you can do. Again, one of my issues with FFG is they were so stuck in the original trilogy era, when West End Games and Wizards of the Coast even went to all different eras of Star Wars, not just the OT. I understand that the OT is probably the most loved thing that all fans can enjoy, especially in 2012, 2011, when they first came in the scene and Disney bought Star Wars, and prequel hate was at its highest at that point, I think. I think they kind of just were playing it safe to make sure that their stuff sold. Now, it's good stuff, but it still is, for me, feeling kind of limited. I do think it's better than Wizards of the Coast, but again, nothing beats West End Games. So, here's the thing, too. If going by Legends, after the Force and Destiny rulebook came out, and they did all their great things with this, that's basically when Fantasy Flight said, okay, now we're going to kind kind of do new canon and Legends. We're going to combine them. And that was kind of when I started to bow out of the role-playing games, of picking these up. Now, the problem is, too, I didn't necessarily do that for all Star Wars games. In fact, for Star Wars, the card game, I got an expansion that had Ferris Olin in it. I'm like, whoa, that's an obscure character in comparison to some of the bigger EU characters, or heck, even the film characters. But then in that same expansion, you also get Rebels characters. And I'm just sitting there thinking, what? So I kind of stopped buying Fantasy Flight games from that point on. Destiny was really the only one that I continued to do. But even then, after getting quite a few new canon stuff, I kind of just was done. And again, at this point, I've kind of have been tempted to sell off my Destiny collection. But that's beside the point. So, as Legends fans, you can of course follow this stuff. But basically, anything post this is going to be considered both EU and new canon. So it's up to you if you want to get it or not. I know they've started now diving into the prequel era, in particular the Clone Wars. So finally we're getting those kinds of things. But again, because it's mixing canon, I've kind of just decided to just stop buying it. I'm happy with what I have in my collection. I have all three and quite a few of the source books from that. I've picked some more up as time has gone on. So it's up to you. Personally, I like Edge of the Empire a little bit more than the other two, just because it is a little bit different. And again, it's kind of encouraging, kind of being on the run and underground, something that you usually don't get to do in Star Wars games. A lot of times you're you're Jedi or you're the Rebels and you're fighting the Sith or the Empire kind of thing, So that's just me. So anyways, folks, at the end of the day, if you're going to hunt down this stuff is not essential. Let's just answer that question right now. It's not essential pickup for you. There are some short stories in the adventure journals by Weston Games that might be worth getting if you're a completist, but these aren't going to be like major plot points in, EU novels or something. But it does expand on the lore, and it does elaborate more on it. And it just adds more to it. For me, I feel like I gained more knowledge about this, this galaxy, that's from a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. I learned more about it, more about the universe from, Weston Games, Wizards of the Coast, and now Fantasy Flight. So that's just me personally. I think if you're going to get them, if you want a current Star Wars RPG to get into and that you actually want to play, that's, maybe not so pricey, I'd go with the Fantasy Flight stuff, just because this stuff is still being printed right now. So it's not like you're going to be breaking the bank to get it. Now Fantasy Flight did actually reprint the original Weston Games Star Wars role-playing game. So you can get the beginner game for Weston Games and get like the original Star Wars source book, which is really cool. So if you're wanting to do that, do that. If you're wanting to do any of Fantasy Flight stuff, again, I would recommend Edge of the Empire, but the other two, Age of Rebellion, Force and Destiny, are not bad. There's nothing wrong with doing those either. And again, you can mix and match. So if you want to start with one and then go to the other two with your same character, you can. As for EU content, I'd only get it if you're a completist. Personally, there's a lot of good stuff. I'd even say in all three of them. Again, I'm always going to say Weston Games is where you should go, but there is good stuff in there. So again, it's ultimately up to you. But quite frankly, I think that there is so much to get from these, from the RPGs, from all three companies even. And so again, if you're wanting more Star Wars EU to delve into and to consume, I think that the role-playing games are a great possible solution for you. So folks, that is all the time I have today. Thank you so much for tuning into this supplement, and join me next time as we go back to the main Star Wars library and start going through the rest of the 80s to get to that awesome Bantam era in the 90s. Take care, folks. May the Force be with you.